B.J. Palmer, one of the founders of chiropractic, is known to have said, "Get the big idea and all else follows." And while BJ was talking about the big idea of chiropractic, right, I think that his little saying is rather profound. For me, it means if you can grab the concept, that big idea of something, then you can figure out the details of how to achieve that concept. In fact, I've often found that there are many ways to achieve a big idea. So what we're going to talk about today is grasping the big ideas, the essential ideas behind packing for a motorcycle trip. Because if you get these concepts, right, then you don't need me or somebody else to come up with the list of things that you need to carry. You can do that all by yourself. When I took my first big trip back in 2011, I didn't know any of this stuff. I just threw everything that I had inside my duffel bag and headed across the country. And of course, I ended up taking all kinds of stuff I just didn't need. I just completely overwhelmed myself with things that I didn't need to bring along with me. So grasping these big ideas, well, that's going to help you to eliminate that need that we all have to overpack. So the first of these big or essential ideas is to only bring the essentials. Don't bring things that don't really have a purpose and aren't really going to help you achieve your goal of driving cross country and getting back home again. Now, I realize that what is essential might be different for everybody. For example, is a camp chair essential? I mean, I can pull the panniers off of my Tiger 1200. I can sit on those in camp, but it doesn't have a back on it, so it's not very comfortable, especially if I'm doing that for many days in a row. So having a camp chair with a back on it that allows me to sit down and relax, well, that could be essential. So what things are essential? Well, for me, of course, I need my riding gear. I need my helmet. I need my jacket. I need my pants, right? I need gloves. I need boots, right? I need mid layers, right? Because it might get cold. It might get hot. I may want to put something else on, right? Other than just my jacket. So those things are all going to be essential items that I want to carry. Now let's stop here and talk about rain gear for just a second, because it is obviously an essential item. For me, my rain gear is built into the jacket, to the mid layer, to the boots, and to the gloves that I carry with me. I typically will get stuff that has some kind of waterproof liner built into it. If you don't, however, if you choose to use a rain suit, well then that is going to of course be an essential item. I want to carry base layers, for example. Those are essential for me. And then clothing to use off of the motorcycle. Those are essential items. Along with those items, of course, a toolkit of some kind is going to be essential. Right? You don't need to get super elaborate. You need tools that are going to allow you to perform emergency repairs. In particular, the biggest thing you're going to have to deal with are flats. So you're going to need the tools necessary to fix the flat on your bike. Now that could be just a plug if you have tubeless tires, but if you have tube tires and you're out in the middle of nowhere, well then you may need things like tire irons and again the sockets necessary to remove your wheels and those kinds of things. So you need to go through and figure out what is essential to be able to change a flat tire. A couple of things that I have always found to be essential: Gorilla tape and zip ties. It's amazing what you can do to get your bike somewhere where it can be repaired for good with just those two items. Another essential item is a first aid kit, at least of some kind. You need something to help with minor scrapes, cuts, bug bites, those kinds of things. But also remember that here in the United States and Canada, if you're traveling there most often, well, there's drugstores pretty much everywhere, and you can get the kind of items that you need pretty easily. Things that you won't be able to get so easily are things that are associated with traumatic injuries, right? Things to stop bleeding, right? Things to do CPR, right? So those kind of items might be good to carry with you, especially if you're traveling with other people. If, however, you're traveling by yourself, remember, if you're the guy that got thrown off the bike and you have some traumatic injury, well, you probably aren't going to be able to get back to your bike to get to all of those things. You're probably going to have to depend on the kindness of strangers. And fortunately, I've always found that they tend to show up. Other essential items are, of course, your personal care items. What do you need? Brush your teeth, right? Your toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, your medications, right? Those things are all essential. Also, any paperwork that you need. Of course, your license, proof of insurance. If you're traveling abroad, then you're going to need your passport. All of those kinds of things you're going to need to carry. They are essential. And in today's world, of course, cell phone is probably essential so that you can get a hold of somebody in case of an emergency. Having some kind of satellite device for emergency situations, well, that's probably a good idea as well. The second concept you need to grasp is that every long trip is just a series of shorter trips. So really what you want to do is pack for, well, I typically go for 3 or 4 days. I typically carry 4 days of base layers, for example. Right? I'm wearing one when I leave and I have 3 in reserve, and then I use those along the way, and then eventually I'm going to wash them again, replenish it, and start over again. So using this 3 or 4 day concept really keeps your clothing down to a minimum, and it, again, makes it just really easy to pack. I divide my clothing into 2 categories, on bike and off bike. On bike, well, those are my base layers, as I've mentioned a couple of times, including my socks, my underwear, and my shirts. My off-bike clothing, well, that's my jeans, right? Maybe a pair of shorts, my t-shirts, my underwear, the things that I need to walk around off the bike. Now, earlier I mentioned mid layers, right? You definitely are going to need some mid layers to prepare for, again, changes in weather. And also, those mid layers can be used both on the bike and off the bike. Here's another thing that I do for all of my articles of clothing as well as my personal care items. I put them in waterproof bags. Even though my panniers are waterproof, I still want that double layer of protection because there's nothing worse than getting your clothes all wet when you pull into a hotel or into a campground and you just want to get comfortable. Another thing that really helps me is that when I pack, that is when I put everything into my panniers every day, I always do it the same way. Everything has its place and it always goes back in the same place. That way I know it's going to fit and I don't have to think about it. I bring it out, stick it in that same spot every day. It just makes life a lot easier. Get into a routine of how you're packing your panniers every day. When I start having trouble, and every time I go out on a trip, there's at least a couple of days where I'm just tired of going through this process. And what usually gets to me is when I don't follow my routine or I start to rush. Right? So I just go as slow as I need to go. I follow my routine. And usually everything is fine. As I said, there's usually a day or two when I get tired of it after 40 days of doing this, right? But I typically get over it. So the last concept is a big one, and that is don't what if yourself to death. I did this again on my first trip. What if this happens? What if that happens? You start taking all of these things for these what ifs, right? And that's when you inevitably will overpack and again make yourself miserable. There's very few things that you can't get by without when you're out there traveling. And there's even fewer things that you can't find somewhere else. For example, once Kathy and I ended up staying at a hotel overnight we weren't expecting to, so we ended up needing to go and find some clothing, right? So we ran down to the local Walmart and we bought a few articles of clothing so that we could spend the night at this hotel and go to a party, basically. Right? So those things are easily fixable when you're out there on the road. Now, of course, you do want to be prepared. You do want to have that toolkit. You do want to have that first aid kit, and you hope that you don't have to use them, right? Those are two things that you do carry with you, and you hope that you don't use, right? But most of the things, you need to have a purpose for it, right? I carry a tire pump, for example, a battery-powered tire pump. I use it every day, right? Even if I don't have a flat tire, I'm hooking it up and I'm checking my tire pressures and I'm topping them off. Again, that's an essential item. But needing to have extra levers and extra cables and an extra chain and all of these things, well, again, that can just get overwhelming. Because in today's world, you've got that cell phone, you should have, right, some kind of emergency towing for your motorcycle. I get mine through the AMA and through BMW. I have two of them. I believe AAA has it available as well. The BMW, for example, is good in the United States and in Canada that the AMA insurance is not. So that might be one to look into. I mean, everybody is different, but personally, I'm not going to try and, repair my motorcycle on the side of the road, right? I'm going to call somebody, we'll get it back to a location, either at my hotel for the night or to a dealer, where we can then address the problem for real. On the side of the road, I'm going to do things that will allow me to get to that location if I can get the bike to go, but if I can't, well, then it's time to call up the tow company and have them come get me. One other essential item I do carry with me as part of my toolkit is a tow rope. When I went to Alaska, for example, I knew I was going to go through some remote areas, and if my bike broke down and I couldn't get it started again, I figured, well, I'm going to flag down another rider and I'm going to see if I can get them to tow me to the next town, which may have been 100 miles away. So the bottom line there is, again, take reasonable precautions, but don't go crazy. So let's sum all this up. 1, only take the things that are really essential for you completing this trip. 2nd, of course, pack for 3 or 4 days. You do not need to carry 14 days of clothing, right? 3 or 4 days works just fine. Stop and wash it. 3rd, get yourself into a routine. Pack the same way every day. Everything should have its place, and it should go back there, again, every time you pack. And also, take your time. Don't rush, right? It's no big deal if it takes a couple more minutes. And lastly, again, don't what if yourself, right? You can think of all kinds of things that could go wrong that probably never will go wrong. And if something does, well, you'll deal with it while you're out there. Let me know if there are other essential concepts that you think should be used while packing for a motorcycle trip. And of course, be safe out there and keep squeezing that lemon.